Hello everyone and welcome back to the Lost Planeswalker, and today I'm going to do a commander deck of the brand new Indominus Rex Alpha. This is a brand new card that's going to come out alongside the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and it's from the Jurassic World series of cards. And this one is actually pretty neat. So Indominus Rex Alpha is one hybrid blue-black, green-green. So 5 mana in general, but you can either choose to use black or black and blue to cast this spell. So it's a legendary creature, dinosaur mutant, with as Indominus Rex Alpha enters the battlefield, discard any number of creature cards. It enters with a flying counter if the card discarded this way had flying. The same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Hexproof, Haste, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. When Indominus Rex enters the battlefield, draw a card for each counter on it. Indominus Rex is an awesome card. We are going to base the main strategy of this deck around using cards that have 2 to 3 keyword abilities each on them, so whenever you cast Indominus Rex, you can get as many abilities as possible, draw a bunch of cards, and then just be able to go all out. I can see you being able to build this deck in several different ways. You know, I'm focusing more on, hey, look at all of the cool creatures, but if you wanted to do a reanimator strategy as well, you can kind of pitch a ton of different cards to the graveyard and then draw into maybe all of your reanimation. This is a really cool idea. In addition to that, if you want to do a copy token ability, there's a lot of cards in blue now that can make non-legendary copies of creatures. And in doing so, you can make multiple Indominus Rex Alphas and continue to, just run through your deck, get all the good cards you need while pitching away cards that have good keywords and then reanimating them. So let's dive right in to the land base. That's where I always start, and like normally, I'm just going to go through this real quickly. I actually made a pretty good land base for this deck, including fetch lands, shock lands, lands that enter the battlefield untapped if you have so many opponents, of course, command tower, reliquary tower, rogue's passage. So if you want to check that out, please look at the link in the description to this deck list. I'm not going to run through them all because it's going to be a waste of time, but this land base that I made is actually pretty cool, so you might want to check it out. So starting right out, I want to check out our first category that I'm calling Counters Matters cards. So this is going to be 2 cards that focus on, caring about you having counters on stuff. So first off, we have Luxior, Giada's Gift, in the Ozolith. Luxior, the Giada's Gift, says equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each counter on it. Equipped permanent isn't a planeswalker and is a creature in addition to its other types. So you can equip this basically to a planeswalker to turn it into a creature, which is pretty cool. But in our case, we're going to be putting a ton of counters on our commander creature, Indominus Rex, and this is just going to give us +1/+1 for each of those. So whether we have lifelink, flying, indestructible, we're going to get a whole bunch of good stuff from that. And secondly, the Ozolith is a legendary artifact from Ikoria that says whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from the Ozolith onto a target creature. This is just going to basically say whenever a commander, leaves the battlefield, we can throw everything on there and maybe throw all those good stuff onto another creature, or keep it there so when we recast our commander, we can throw them back on. You have a lot of options in that case, but these are the 2 counter cards. So first off, I'm going to move into the cards in this deck that are just good cards in general, but are great with our commander. And these cards each have 2 abilities on them. I split it up that way because it's just going to be a little easier to see. So first off, we have Baleful Strix, Balehound, and Basura Tower Archer. We have Flying, Death Touch, Lifelink, Haste, and Hexproof and Reach. All great keywords. Baleful Strix, in addition, is also great because if we don't want to, use this for our commander, we can just still play it and we have a great flying Death Touch threat. Bantu the Glorified, Glissa Sunslayer, and Kafnet the Mindful is next. These gods from Amonkhet, like Bantu and Kafnet, are fantastic because they give our creature indestructible, which is a keyword we really, really love. In this case, I'm not the most excited for these cards because while they're cool, they kind of have restrictions on them, and we really don't care about that. We really just care about the counters. And Glissa Sunslayer is a awesome card because it has First Strike and Death Touch, and this ability combination is really unique because when somebody has First Strike and Death Touch, when you go to First Strike damage, you just instantly kill whatever creature you were blocking, unless they also have First Strike. So it's a really cool ability, and to be able to put that on a commander creature is insane, especially if we can also do Trample. Trample and Death Touch is a whole nother ball of wax, but it's a really, really good combination. Our next 3 cards is Kinchin Imp, Leyline Prowler, and Ronus the Indomitable. Kitchen Imp is one of my favorite cards because it has Flying Haste and Madness. So when we're going to discard this card to Indominus Rex, for a single black, we can cast it. It's not the biggest threat, but it's kind of cool that this Madness ability is going to kick in and let us activate him. Leyline Prowler is just a cool little mana dork, and Ronus the Indomitable also gives Death Touch and Indestructible, which we really love that Indestructible, but our commander is going to have 4 greater power, so if we just want to play this as a normal card, it's actually a pretty good creature, and we can also buff our commander and give it trample and all that good stuff. And lastly, the card that looks like it has 3 abilities but only has 2 that we care about is Indominus Rex. This is a cool card to play later in the game. An 8/8 with trample and haste is perfect, but it has ward 4, and notably, Indominus Rex Alpha does not care about ward 4 or ward in general, so he only really cares about the trample and haste off of this card, and that's something we're going to see just a couple more times moving forward. Before we look at the cards that have 3 keywords on them, I just want to say, if you aren't subscribed to my channel, please do so. I'm going to be doing all sorts of new commander decks around all of the new Lost Caverns of Ixalan cards as they come out, and I hope you're excited for the set. It's starting to look really, really cool. I have a feeling that they're going to do a undead dinosaur, probably Golgari, and I'm very, very excited about that. So as soon as we get that news, I'm building that deck. But yeah, just stick with me. I'm going to be building all sorts of new commander decks around this new set, and if that's something you enjoy, please subscribe and stick around. But now, looking at those 3 keyword ability cards, that is the main bread and butter of this deck. We really love those. We have Elder Gargaroth, Endrazor Forerunner, and Eradicator Valkyrie. Elder Gargaroth is one of my favorite cards from M21 because we get Vigilance, Reach, and Trample on a creature, and we get a really cool attack and block trigger, which we can either use to make more creatures, gain some life, or draw a card. Endrazor Forerunner, Vigilance, Trample, Haste, another great combination, and whenever we cast him, we get a bunch of buffs, but he is 8 mana, so if we just want to get that Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, and then draw 3 off our commander, that's good too. And Eradicator Valkyrie, flying lifelink hexproof from Planeswalkers. Now, our commander cares about hexproof. I believe the ability hexproof from Planeswalkers does transition over, so it's not full hexproof, but it is still very, very cool. Next is Gurmag Swiftwing, Miri the Cursed, and Nighthawk Scavenger. We get Flying, First Strike, and Haste, which is pretty great. Again, with Miri, we get Flying, First Strike, and Haste, and whenever it deals combat damage, we put a +1/+1 on it, which is okay. I really love grabbing those abilities instead. And Nighthawk Scavenger with Flying, Death Touch, and Lifelink, and its power is equal to 1+ the number of cards among cards in your opponent's graveyards. So this is one we might honestly want to cast instead of grabbing its abilities, but we still have it in a pinch. Next up is Night Veil Predator, Questing Beast, and Rapanop Hydra. Night Veil Predator has Flying, Death Touch, and Hexproof, which is awesome. Giving our creature hexproof just makes it so, people can't target, which is super, super powerful. Questing Beast is one of my favorite cards ever printed. It has a ton of great abilities, but gives you Vigilance, Death Touch, and Haste. And Rapanop Hydra has Vigilance, Trample, and Reach, and gets +1/+1 for as long as you control a desert, and gets +1/+1 for as long as there's a desert in your graveyard. So probably not the best card in our deck if we want to cast it for 4 mana, but Vigilance, Reach, and Trample is definitely worthwhile on our commander. Next up, we have Triplicate Titan, Vampire Nighthawk, and Vengeful Reaper. Triplicate Titan has Flying, Vigilance, and Trample. Some pretty good keywords right there. Good evasion, keeps it up. And it is 9 mana, so maybe later in the game we cast this, but I'm not so sure that I would want to keep it. The extra 3 creatures is nice when it dies, but it's even better on our commander. Vampire Nighthawk, Flying, Death Touch, and Lifelink, pretty great. And Vengeful Reaper, Flying, Death Touch, and Haste. Giving our commander Haste is just going to be super, super powerful. On the turn that we cast it, we can just instantly attack and hopefully deal a ton of damage. Next up, we have Venomthrope, Weathered Sentinels, and Wilson Refined Grizzly. Venomthrope, again, Flying, Death Touch, and Hexproof. Pretty cool right there. Weathered Sentinels technically has 4 keywords, but remember, we don't care about Defender. So we're going to get Vigilance, Reach, and Trample, which are some good keywords as well. And lastly, Wilson Refined Grizzly with Vigilance, Reach, and Trample as well. Wilson's just a little guy, probably not the best. He's a, 2-drop for 2. He's a bear, obviously, and, not going to be super great other than using him for his abilities. But that leads us to our last card in this section, and this is a 4 keyword card, and I think I only really found one of these that really works for all of our stuff. It was one that I researched anyways. It is called Scavenged Brawler, and it is 6 mana artifact creature construct from the Brothers War Commander decks. I thought maybe this was printed, at a different time, but I guess this was only for the Commander decks. We have Flying, Vigilance, Trample, and Lifelink, all great keywords. And it has a cool ability for 5, exile it from your graveyard, choose a target creature, put 4 +1/+1 counters, a flying counter, a vigilance counter, a trample counter, and a lifelink counter on that creature. Activate only as a sorcery. So this essentially does what our Commander does, but you can do it to any creature, which actually works pretty well in our case, because we're going to pitch it from our hand, get all of that stuff, and then can just exile it for 5 mana and put all that on another creature. I really love this card, and it being the only one that we really care about all 4 abilities. Unfortunately, I wish there was more of those, but discard 1 card, draw 4. Yep, I really like that. So next up, the category that I kind of separated these next cards into is called Reanimation and Duplication. All of these cards really kind of care about graveyard, getting stuff back, whether it's a card or a creature, maybe making duplicates of stuff. And I really like this strategy, so I added a good number of cards to it. But first off, we have Animate Dead, Eternal Witness, and Helm of the Host. Animate Dead is just going to be able to get us anything back from our graveyard for 2 mana. Triplicate Titan's looking a little bit better now. It only gets -1 to its power, so an 8/9 for 2 mana, I will definitely take that. Eternal Witness, great card, lets us get any card back from our graveyard. And Helm of the Host is a card I don't put in a lot of decks, but I think it works well here. At the beginning of combat on our turn, create a token that's a copy of equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary. If the equipped creature is legendary, then that token gains haste. So we're going to create a token of our commander. Our commander is going to enter the battlefield. We can discard a bunch of cards and then draw a bunch of cards that we do like. So I think that this is a killer card in this deck, and I really like it. Next, we have Lightning Greaves, Living Death, and Muldrotha the Gravetide. Lightning Greaves obviously gives our commander haste and shroud if we don't have those abilities, and just to protect him is really powerful. Living Death is probably one of the best cards in this deck because we're going to be pitching as many creatures to our graveyard as possible. So for 5 mana, each player exiles all creature cards from his or her graveyard, then sacks all creatures he or she controls, then puts all cards he or she exiled this way onto the battlefield. So basically we just switch our graveyards with our libraries, and if we're pitching all of the creatures in our deck and keep drawing them and keep pitching them, this is a great way to kind of overrun effect win the game. And Muldrotha the Gravetide, obviously any Sultai deck really just loves Muldrotha in it, and being able to then cast lands and permanent spells from our graveyard is exactly what we want to do. All of those creatures we're pitching, they get a second chance with Muldrotha and can come back again. Next up, we have Reanimate, Spark Double, and the Mimeoplasm. Reanimate, just like Animate Dead, is going to help us get something back from our graveyard, except it's not enchanted this time. We just lose life equal to its converted mana cost. Spark Double, another great card. It's going to make a copy of our commander, comes in with a +1/+1 on it, and we pitch more cards and draw some more. And the Mimeoplasm, again, similar to Muldrotha, cares about stuff in our graveyard. So as it enters the battlefield, we can exile 2 creatures from our graveyard. Perfect. That's exactly what we're putting in there. If you do it, it enters the battlefield. It's a copy of one of those cards with a number of additional +1/+1 counters on it equal to the power of the other card. We are surely pitching some really big stuff, so making a copy of one thing and then just adding a ton of +1/+1 counters on the other is an awesome card, and I really love the Mimeoplasm. And for 5 mana, it is well worth it in this deck. Next, we have maybe one of the coolest new cards from this new set that is going to be very broken. We have the Skullport Nexus, Tortured Existence, and Vorinclex Monstrous Raider. The Skullport Nexus is a legendary artifact that says this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Right off the bat, if our commander comes in, this is only going to cost 2 green mana. So that's perfect. In addition, whenever one or more non-token creatures we control die, we create a Fungus Dinosaur token with base power and toughness equal to that total power. That's pretty great. And lastly, for 2 mana, we can tap this, double target creature's power until end of turn. A really powerful way we're probably going to win the game is by commander damaging our opponents out. This commander is set up perfectly for that. At 6 power, giving it flying and trample and vigilance and all these other evasion, things is going to mean that we really want to just swing in every turn to deal as much possible damage. And we can trigger this in response to blockers. So if our opponents, choose to block or not block, then we can just swing in and hit for a ton of damage. So I really, really love this. Next up with Tortured Existence. This is one of my favorite cards, and it comes from a set called Stronghold. It's a, rather old set, and it has a really unique ability. For 1 black mana, we can choose and discard a creature card and then return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So all of those cards we're pitching, well, now we can just discard whatever's in our hand. Maybe it's some, not really interesting card, and get something back, and either to cast with our commander or to just cast in general. Tortured Existence is a really, really cool card, and it is going up in price a little bit, around, $350, but it's definitely a worthwhile inclusion. And Vorinclex Monstrous Raider. This is one I was thinking about adding up above because it does have some, abilities that we care about, but the doubling of counters is kind of a, it's something I didn't really fully flesh out in this deck, and I think it's a cool idea. Basically, when our commander comes in, we're going to double all the counters that we place on it. But, the kind of better benefit here for us is just, any counters our opponents would use are just halved. In a lot of the cases, if it's 1 and we round down, they don't get to put a counter on that. So that's a pretty good ability, just to have in this deck. And lastly, the last card I chose to include in this deck is Yarok the Desecrated. I think just because this was another soul tie sort of commander staple, I threw it in here. In addition, we have Death Touch and Lifelink, but we don't really have too many, ETB triggers. Similar to Vorinclex, when it enters, we're going to double the counters we put on our commander, and if we have the Ozlith, then that really matters. But there's not too many cards that have ETB abilities that, really matter too much in this deck, because that's not what we're really focusing on. But there are quite a bit, so it's not, unworthwhile having it in the deck at all. In this last section of the video, I'm going to run through real quick, and I call this the good stuff. So this is all the other stuff that I threw in there to help round out the deck. Some of it's pretty simple and you would expect, but some of it's kind of cool additions that I like to add. So first off, we have Abrupt Decay, an offer you can't refuse, and Arcane Denial. Abrupt Decay is a, great removal spell because it can't be countered, and obviously an offer you can't refuse and Arcane Denial are 2 great counter spells. In this case, I went with Arcane Denial. I really like it because you still get to draw a card after casting this, and maybe that helps you get into one of your creatures or something else that you might need later on. Arcane Signet, Assassin's Trophy, and Beast Within is next. Arcane Signet is a great mana rock, especially in a 3-color deck. Assassin's Trophy and Beast Within is going to destroy target permanent, which is super great. Assassin's Trophy is going to get its controller a basic land, and Beast Within is going to make them a 3/3. So they come with a price, but they're pretty good for getting rid of anything. Beast Caller, Savant, Birds of Paradise, and Cultivator are next. Beast Caller is just a mana dork with haste, so we can either pitch him to our commander to give him haste, or we can just tap him instantly to add some mana to your mana pool. And Birds of Paradise, similarly, one of the best mana dorks in the game. And Cultivate is just a ramp spell that can help us get him some basic lands on the battlefield and in our hand. Next up is Psychonic Rift, Deadly Rollick, and Dimir Signet. Psychonic Rift, great card, can help bounce everything back to our opponent's hands, and we can just swing in with our commander. Especially good in decks where we care about commander damaging out our opponents. Deadly Rollick is going to help us exile a pesky creature our opponents control, and Dimir Signet is just a mana rock for some more mana. Farseek, Golgari Signet, and Growth Spiral are next. Farseek is another great ramp card, Golgari Signet is another great mana rock, and Growth Spiral is going to have us draw a card, and then we can play an additional land, which is going to be super helpful in the early game if we want to get out early. Next is Heroic Intervention, Putrefy, and Rhystic Study. Heroic Intervention is not as great for our commander because we're already going to be putting Hexproof and Indestructible on him, but it's going to help us protect the rest of our board, which is super cool. Putrefy is going to destroy target artifact or creature, and Rhystic Study is just a great way to draw more cards. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, we get to draw a card unless they pay 1 for it. So if you're playing decks that really care about being as mana efficient as possible, they're going to hate Rhystic Study. Next up is the Great Henge, 3 visits in Toxic Deluge. The Great Henge is just one of the best cards ever printed. Similarly to the Skullport Nexus, it's going to cost X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. And using the Skullport Nexus, you can very easily make this just 2 green mana. It instantly enters battlefield and adds 2 green mana, and you gain 2 life, being one of the most powerful mana rocks paying for itself the turn it enters. And then whenever a non-token creature enters battlefield, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. I can't say enough good things about this card. There's a reason it's still $40 and it was reprinted, twice recently. It's just that good. 3 visits, search your library for a basic forest, put on the battlefield, then shuffle. And Toxic Deluge says we can pay, as an addition to cast this spell, we pay X life, and all creatures get -X/-X until end of turn. Hopefully this doesn't happen while our commander's on the battlefield, and we can kind of just reset the board and then cast him out with haste and flying and whatever and just swing in for a ton of damage. But this is one of the best removal spells just because it's so versatile. And our last card in this deck is Worldly Tutor. You know, I didn't put any other tutors in this deck, but I thought Worldly Tutor was worthwhile because we can just tutor up whatever creature we want, either to play or use for our commander's sake. And for 1 green mana, that seems pretty good. So I just want to say thank you so much for watching. I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary this past Monday, and I am so happy to be doing videos. You know, everything's going great on this channel. I just took a week off last week. Maybe some of you noticed, maybe some of you didn't. But you know, I'm back. I'm making videos. You should expect, you know, 2 to 3 a week from now on, and I hope to be coming up with some cool videos in the future here. But if you like videos like I just did and you want to see more of them, you know, you can check them out on my channel, but please consider subscribing. That would be fantastic. I think as of like right now, I'm 3 subscribers away from 1,200, which is just incredible. I'm so happy about that, and I'm so thankful for all of you who are watching and, you know, trust me to make these videos and enjoy watching them. I really appreciate it. If there's a card or maybe there's a strategy like I talked about at the beginning of the video that you really think I should add to this deck, please leave in the comments. I love seeing those comments. I love, you know, talking to you guys about it. I've got some great ideas, especially when the Wild of Eldraine decks came out. I got a lot of cool suggestions about, oh, this is a cool card to add, and something I never even thought about. So I really appreciate those comments, and if you want to help me out another way, please leave a like and share this with a friend. It does help me, and I really do appreciate it. So I'm going to go over to today's Scryfall card of the day, which is Chandra's Spitfire. I've lit most everything on fire. Trees, rocks, even the water. Now it's time to burn the clouds. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.